did our plays in the dining room, on that stage in the dining room. But I've been here as a parent. 2 of my daughters also entered. So I remember sitting like right around there during some different awards, sports award banquets especially, hoping that my daughter would get picked. And I was seeing like the same people, always got all the awards. Amen to that? But I have wonderful memories of being here, and it's really joyful for me to get to share this day with my friend Liz, and to be able to share with you a little bit about this idea of building or living a life of impact. I want to start by reading a poem, and there's a few reasons for that. The first one, it's a beautiful poem, one of my favorites by Mary Oliver. The second is that poetry stimulates your right hemisphere, like art and music. And when you sit in a seat like that and someone's behind a podium with a microphone like this, your left hemisphere, that linear part of your brain, gets engaged. And I want the right hemisphere of your brain to also be engaged so that you are wholeheartedly, fully brained here, not just in your lecture mode, but I want your whole brain. So, and also this poem has a feel for what I'm going to be trying to say with my words. So this is called The Summer Day by Mary Oliver. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who's moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who's gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is, but I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So that's what I really want to talk about with you today. I'm going to get my watch somewhere I can see it, so that's what I want to be talking about with you today, this morning, is what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And when you hear the title of this talk, Living a Life with Impact, I wonder what comes to your mind. I wish I could see a bubble over everybody's head to see what do you think of when you think of a life with impact. Who comes to your mind, or what comes to your mind? I have to admit, the first thing that comes to my mind is my most recent hero, and that is Greta Thunberg. And even this morning, I watched a short video of her. She is in Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum Summit, and she was being interviewed with some other people that are experts in climate change, and decades younger than everyone else there, with her hoodie and her hair pulled back in a ponytail. And the interviewer says to these people that are activists in climate change, well, what do you do about the haters? And Greta Thunberg chuckles, and she steps in immediately and says, I want to answer a question that I think is much more important than what we do with haters. I want to talk about some data about climate change. And she goes on to read a prepared statement about carbon emissions and how dangerous it is, and then we're running out of time. She just stepped right over a question about haters to express what is so passionate and important for her. And so I think of someone like Greta Thunberg. You might think of Lizzo, a singer, songwriter. Absolutely. I mean, what a person of impact. Both getting so many more Grammy nominations than anyone else this year, Times Entertainer of the Year, and yet she's got this powerful message about body positivity. That's an incredible impact she's making, isn't it? You may think of someone like Sister Helen Prejean, who wrote Dead Man Walk, who continues to work against capital punishment, who wants to eliminate the death penalty, and ministers and cares for people who have done horrible things. Many of them have murdered many people, and yet she has a message over and over again that we cannot define a person by the worst thing they've ever done. That does not define a human being. The biggest mistakes they've made, the worst things they've ever done. they're still a person of dignity who deserves to not die alone. Another hero of mine. Or you may think of Malala, the youngest person to ever receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Amazing activist for women, girls, and women's education. These are incredible people, aren't they? Inspirational. But they're not like most of us, are they? There may be some of you here sitting in this room that may have fame and celebrity, and you may be written about in the newspapers. There may be ways that what you do with your life is on this level of Greta or Lizzo or Malala. But my bet is that most of us will not. And does that mean that we don't have a life of impact? Is there another way maybe to look at what living a life of impact means than celebrity status or fame or fortune? That's what I want to talk about this morning. What does a life with impact mean for the rest of us? So I want to start by having you stop for a minute. I would like you to close your eyes. I would like you to picture in your mind a person who has had a tremendous impact on your life. I want you to picture that person in your mind's eye. Who is someone that you would say has greatly impacted your life? For many, or most of us, at least one of the people who's greatly impacted our life is someone that saw us, someone that believed in us, someone that loved us, someone that helped us know our worth. In my work at Homeboy Industries, one of the things that I hear many of the clients that I work with say is that being here at Homeboy, my story has been returned to myself. My real story has been returned. I'm not just a gangbanger. I'm a father, I'm a mother, I'm a person that wants to have an education. I want to have a house. I want to have a 401k. I want to live a life of meaning, and being here has helped restore me and my story. I would call that an amazing impact. And I wonder for you, as you think of these people that have had an impact on you, it's not because they were famous. It's not because they were necessarily brilliant, but they saw you. They noticed you. They loved you. They believed in you. One of those people that did that for me was my best friend I made here at Catalina. I came here as a sophomore. I was a day student. And I had moved here from Washington State. And I was really nervous about moving to California because I didn't have long hair and I didn't know how to surf. And I felt like I was going to be really out of it. And when I came here, one of the first people I met was Sally McKenzie. And in terms of impact, in many ways, Sally's life has had tremendous impact. She's a tenured professor of agronomy now, soil science, at the University of Pennsylvania. She's presented papers on her work. What she does is she works on the mitochondria of certain types of plants to help these plants produce more protein so they can be planted in parts of the world that are malnourished where they need greater nutrition. She's been on the Discovery Channel, and she's been unbelievable in what she's done with her life in terms of science, in terms of helping people with her science. But the impact that Sally made on my life, she gave me a 16th birthday party. When I came here as a sophomore and I was 16, my parents had just gone through divorce. My dad, in a span of about 2 weeks, decided he was going to move to Hawaii. My mom was really caught up in another group with her friends. She was trying to deal with her pain of all that was going on. And I just remember being totally humiliated coming home, and she and her friends were in the living room having a Saturday Night Live dance disco party. You can imagine coming home and seeing your mother and her friends do disco in your living room, John Travolta. But she was dealing with things in the way she needed to, and my dad was dealing with things the way that he needed to. But I was left pretty alone. I was the oldest of 4 kids, and I was here at Catalina, and I was pretty lost in a lot of ways. And Sally reached out to me and became my friend, and cared for me and loved me in a way I had never been loved before. She wanted to know me. She asked me questions about things that I thought, things that I felt. My family wasn't like that. Very good people. My dad was a surgeon. My mom was a really good person, but they were caught up in their own lives, and they didn't pay a lot of attention to us four kids. Independence and self-reliance were two very strong values in my family. And so we all are that way, and we were that way. But there was a deep loneliness in me. And so Sally, in the way that she cared for me and loved me and wanted to know me, opened up my heart and helped me learn about a way of loving that I had never known before. And it came to be my 16th birthday, and Sally had said, well, what are you going to do? And my dad was gone, and my mom was preoccupied, and I hadn't really thought of it, so I had no plans. So Sally and her mom threw me an amazing 16th birthday party. And for some reason for me, I don't know if it's still that way now, there's something about your 16th birthday that feels kind of special. And to have not had anything on my 16th birthday, I think I would have remembered that. But instead, what I remember is an amazing party filled with so much love and joy. So that's the impact that Sally McKenzie has made on me, far more than all the things that she's accomplished and all the things that she's done. In my work as a clinical psychologist, what I do when people come into my office, people don't get healed because I have these fancy techniques and these skills and these magic ways of being able to be the most profound and incredible technique-y person to help them get over their anxiety or depression or relationship struggles. But how I describe the way I work is I create an emotionally reparative relationship. That's what helps people heal, is when in the midst of their struggles, in the midst of feeling different, in the midst of having abuse that they need to work through, of having great loss that they don't even know how to put words on, anxiety and depression, things that are confusing to them about the way they think or feel, to be in a relationship with someone who sits with them and gives them deep respect and gives them my full presence and listens. It communicates that you're important and I believe in you and I'm actually holding hope that there's something more for you. And that's probably one of the most researched things in the treatment efficacy for clinical psychology, is that the most important thing that heals people is when they have hope. They have hope that life could be different. And that's something that's often delivered more by presence than by technique. So we have the potential, every single one of you here, you have the potential. You don't have to be a clinical psychologist. You have the potential every single day to either add to someone's pain or burden, or to add to their healing and their flourishing. We are all very fragile. No matter how smart, no matter how accomplished, no matter how successful you are, we're very vulnerable and fragile to the way that we're treated and the way that people see us or don't see us, talk to us or don't talk to us. And all of us have the potential to make a tremendous impact towards someone's healing and flourishing. A friend of mine, Kurt Thompson, is a psychiatrist, and he studies an area that's called interpersonal neurobiology. Fascinating, not new, maybe the last 20 years, looking at the way that recent brain neuroscience shows that we are wired for connection. And what does that mean for parenting? What does that mean for marriages, for friendships? What does it mean that we are wired for connection? And how do we foster that? Or what are the things that get in the way of that? And he's written a couple fabulous books. One is called The Anatomy of the Soul, and the other book is called The Soul of Shame. And he looks at those two concepts, both understanding of the soul, but also what shame does to the soul. But one of the things that Kurt says that the first time I heard him say it, it really jarred me, and he says it a lot when he's speaking. He'll say, there is no such thing as an individual brain. And what he means by that is from the very moment of our conception, we are being shaped and formed by another, aren't we? And even right now, you are having an impact on me. As I look out at you, and I can see some of you, the lights are a little dim in some places, but if most of you were falling asleep or talking to your friends or on your phone or just looking bored, it would so impact the way I am giving this talk right now. I would become anxious. I would begin feeling more self-conscious. I would not be able to think as clearly. Whereas what I can see, which I appreciate greatly, is most of you look attentive. I feel welcomed. I feel your interest and it helps me relax. It helps me be able to give more to you. It's a very small way that in all our interactions, we're always taking in how we believe another person is seeing us. And if what we're viewed through our eyes that are judgmental or dismissive or demeaning, that absolutely impacts my brain as opposed to if I'm received with interest and grace and compassion and tenderness. So I want to talk about two ways that we can practice this. We can practice this way of being, this way of living a life of impact, no matter who we are or what we ever accomplish. And the first one has to do with our presence. And I know that the acronym for the health and wellness department is PRESENT, which I love, because this idea of presence is so incredibly powerful for the way that we have an impact on one another. The world is full of presence, isn't it? Think of the presence of a city. I know many of you are from many different parts of the world, but think of the difference of the presence of a city like Berlin as opposed to the presence of New York City, as opposed to the presence of San Diego or Monterey. A city has a presence, doesn't it? You feel it. You feel something. Think of the comforting presence when you're with people you love. What it feels like when you look in the eyes of someone who loves you, their touch, just even them sitting next to you, not even touching you, the presence of someone that loves you, what that does to you. But think again of the troubling presence when you're around someone that you have unfinished business with, someone that you're feeling hurt by, someone you're angry at, and you haven't found a way to talk to them about it yet. The presence of what it's like to be around someone where there's hurt, there's betrayal. There's a presence of sacred spaces, isn't there? Whether that's a cathedral or a grove of redwood trees, when you enter a sacred space, you feel that there's a presence to a space. When you enter a home, have you ever felt the presence in a home? Whether that presence was cold or frightening, or the presence of a home feeling warm and inviting and safe. There's presence that we can experience with someone we just meet for the first time, an absolute stranger. You know, some people might call that energy or aura, but either positive or negative. You cannot know a person at all, and there's a presence about some people that's very positive or very negative, whether they're distracted or interested in you. So one of the things about presence, what it demonstrates is that we are all connected, like my friend Kurt says, about not having an individual brain. Whether we think that way or not, we are tremendously connected, not only to one another, but to this planet. As we feel that presence, we're not just an observer, we're a participant. We're experiencing something in our body that has to do with being in the presence of another thing or person. I have a tree in my front yard in Pasadena where I live, and I wanted to buy the house because of this tree. I literally fell in love with this tree. I wanted to see this tree every day when I woke up. I got really scared about a couple years ago when a number of the trees, the Deodora pine, and they were infected in my neighborhood, and I literally had to start, like, what am I going to do if this tree gets an illness? I don't know what I'm going to do. I love this tree. I have a love relationship with this tree. Even this morning, I think about the connection. I'm so happy that I'm going to be here. I'm so happy that I'm going to be here and get to speak with you. But there's something about connection. This is what I was going to say. There's something about connection that we both long for. It feels so good to feel connected. But it's also something we're terrified at the same time. People both are hungry for connection and we're actually terrified of connection. For instance, me coming here, I'm very happy to be here, but there's also this insecurity or fear that I'm going to disappoint you. Or I heard that when you come speak at a girls' school, you have to be really aware of what you wear, and I don't really know if what I wore is good. So there's this vulnerability that you feel. When you want to be connected, you're exposed. You're risking something. It's easier It's safer to say no to a speaking invitation. It's easier and safer to not engage, not put yourself out there, because then you will not take the risk of being less than or rejected or inadequate. And so something happens with our presence. We have to take a risk to be present. We have to take a risk that there may be some people that don't like us. There may be some situation that we may engage and we may not be as successful as we want to. And so many of us do that. When I was here, I really wanted to go to Stanford, and I never applied because I was afraid of getting rejected. And I don't think that's an uncommon thing. I think people often fear rejection, whether it's from a person, whether it's from some sort of an educational institution or a team. I'm not going to make varsity, so I'm not going to try out. Showing up and being present is scary. It's vulnerable. I have a client right now who is 77 years old. He's going to have his 78th birthday at the end of this month. And he is painfully alone. He is divorced and not remarried, no children. He has an extreme amount of money, and he has a lot of impact in all the ways that many people look at his life and think that he had everything that anyone would ever want. And this man is so painfully alone. And he said to me last week, I've decided I like dogs better than people. He loves dogs. I like dogs better than people. And I've heard that often. There are many people that come into therapy and their best relationships are with their animals, their horse, their cat, their dog. And as he talked about that some more, he said, dogs are just so pure in their presence. Dogs are they just love you unconditionally. They'll never betray you. I've had too many bad experiences with people. And I can really understand that, because it's true, isn't it, that dogs and trees, like the tree in my front yard, nature, there's a pure presence to animals and nature that's simple, and they are what they are. And human beings alone can actually create a false presence, can't they? People can see one way and act another, and it makes them much more dangerous to engage at times than a dog. I'm hoping I'll get to work with this person long enough to help him see that it's worth the risk. That although he can have loving relationships with his dog, there's a depth of his aloneness that is for a person to fill. He really wants another person, not just a dog. A woman named Martha Beck is an author that I've enjoyed reading. She has written two, maybe more, but two that I've read. One is called Expecting Adam. It's her first book. She talks about being a PhD student at Harvard in women's studies and having a really unusual experience happen to her, a spiritual experience. She was pregnant and she wanted to finish her PhD and didn't want to have a baby. And even in her women's studies program at Harvard, there was something about being pregnant that didn't even feel like it kind of fit with the women and the feminist work they were doing. Being a mother always felt kind of awkward for her, and figuring out how to also be a feminist. And so she had decided she was going to abort this baby. And in this book, Expecting Adam, she has this very unusual, she and her husband both have this at the same time. They're in different countries. She's in Boston and he's in Japan. And at the same time, they have the spiritual experience where they know that they are not to abort this child. And they don't. And the child is born with Down syndrome. And it starts Martha Beck on a journey of trying to figure out what are humans made for. And she realizes that human beings are not made primarily just to be smart. All her life she'd been valued for being smart. And that's what she looked down on people that were not smart. And she realizes at the birth of her son Adam, and what it's like to live and love a son with Down syndrome, that we're so much more than just our intellect. And so she decides to drop out of her PhD program, and she became a life coach. And she wrote another book soon after that called Finding Your Own North Star. And in this book, she says that we have two experiences of ourself. We have our essential self, and we have our social self. And she says that the key to building a life of impact, living a life of impact, is to learn to balance these two parts of yourself and let our essential self be the North Star. Now the North Star, I'm sure lots of you know this, also known as the Polaris, It's the brightest star in the constellation of the Little Dipper. And it's been used throughout history for navigation because it's positioned almost exactly above the North Pole. So you can tell where north is. And if you know where north is, then you know where south and east and west is. So that idea of your essential self being your North Star. Your essential self, she says, is something that's there at birth. It's core to your unique essence. Your genetics, your temperament, your gifts, your desires, your emotional reactions. These are things that would be in you no matter where you were born, no matter what family you were born into. This is your unique gift. And there is that part of life, isn't it, that's just a gift, that we did nothing to curate, we did nothing to build. There's parts of life that we just are, and we just have to accept and receive. But then there's also the social self. And she doesn't see the essential self as good and the social self as bad. The social self is important and significant. This is a self that we do develop in response to people, in response to the people around us. Our cultural values, the family that we were raised in, what were the expectations, what were the rules, what were the roles. We develop skills and abilities to help us achieve things in life. This is important. It's an important part of life. But she says the problem becomes when our social self so dominates our experience of life that it drowns out our essential self. That we live our lives disconnected from that core uniqueness that we were born with, our essence, our unique essence. For instance, if you're trying to just make yourself a better person and you're studying really, really hard, and you want to get all A's, and you want to do lots of extracurriculars so you've got a really great college application, and you're doing this because you heard from another student that if you do that, that looks really good, and you're building a life and you're living in ways to get to the next thing, but you've not stopped to check in with, is this really bringing me joy? Is this what I really want to learn? Is this what I feel like I was built and made to do? So you can do a lot of stuff but feel very unfulfilled, feel empty, sometimes even sink into depression and anxiety because you're living a false life. When lives are dominated by our social self, we don't feel a lot of truth and joy and love. Life doesn't feel like a great adventure. We don't feel overwhelmed with gratitude. We don't feel flooded with love for other people. We don't feel fascinated with what we're learning. We don't laugh out loud very often. And you may think of those things as ideals, like, Laura, come on, who lives that way? And maybe that's an extreme and ideal, but if you're not experiencing any of that, any of the time, and what happens, what's really frightening, is that we become accustomed or habituated to life like that, life dominated by our social self. And you know that word habituated is like if you move in to a house that's right near the freeway, and when you first move in, you hear all that noise. You know what happens in a few months, right? You don't hear it anymore. Our brains habituate to that which we are constantly in the presence of, and we don't recognize it anymore. And so we become habituated to lives that are dominated by this social self. So what we need to do, again, getting back to presence, how can I be that presence, that healing presence that helps you recover your story, that makes an impact of compassion and tenderness if I'm disconnected from my own essence? We have to begin, if we want to be these people of presence, with being present to ourselves. Your essential self is what you need to practice paying attention to. And we do that by noticing what activities, what people, what experiences energize and stimulate me. We can't only do those things. The social self is important, but are you doing any of those things? Do you even know what they are? I'm not going to have time to go into it right now, but there's a really interesting, I don't even know what to call it. It's not actually a form of therapy. It's a therapy tool. It's called Nonviolent Communication. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. but it's by a man named Marshall Rosenberg developed this. And what he says, which is fascinating to me, and I really see it in my work at Homeboy, that most of our disruptive behavior, our unhealthy behavior that's driven by aggression, by anxiety, by jealousy, is when our needs are not met. When our needs are met, think of what comes out of us. Think of what comes out of you when your needs are met. When our needs are met, we usually respond to people and to the world with openness and generosity and kindness. We're content. And when our needs are not met, we can get depressed, we can get angry, we can get aggressive. And so he says, how many people live their lives not even knowing what their genuine needs are? And so I use this a lot in my therapy. And it's amazing. I really like to use it a lot when I do couples work. And I ask the couples if they know what their partner's needs are. Can they describe what their partner's needs are? Because how can we form a loving marriage? How can we meet one another's needs if I don't even know what to tell you what my needs even are? But it's true in all of life. So this idea of our essential self, knowing what our needs are. I'm learning. I just turned 60 last August, and I'm learning more about my essential self. You know, my social self got developed a lot around the fact, as I said before, I grew up in a family that was pretty disconnected. Good people, honest people, hardworking people, but not intimate people. Not people that I never remember coming home from school and having my mom comfort me when I was even little. I don't remember sitting on her lap. I think, you know, I was never neglected or abused in any way, but I wasn't deeply known. And part of what I learned then is that as I began taking care of other people's needs, I began taking care, especially of my mother's needs, and then I began doing that in other relationships, that people wanted me around. That when I met other people's needs, they wouldn't leave me. They would stay. And so my social stuff, it's no wonder to me that I became both a clinical psychologist and a Presbyterian minister. It's like one helping profession wasn't enough for me. Because I had this drive to meet people's needs. And a lot of it was that social self that said that will be valuable. And what I'm learning more and more now, and I will continue to learn, I'm sure, as long as I'm on this earth, is that my essential, the part of me that loves to sit in a chair and read for hours at a time. The part of me that loves to play the piano, and I love the horseback ride. Like those activities that have nothing to do with another person, are just me enjoying my body, enjoying my mind, enjoying quiet. The part of me that's trying to become a gardener, that's why I'm trying to be a gardener. Everything I've done is always with people. And there's something so meditative and quiet about being with plants. But I'm still working on that. My essential self has value. I'm not just valuable because I meet somebody else's needs. At Homeboy, every Monday is when I go, and I'm there on Mondays. Every day they do this, but I hear these on Mondays when I go there. They have something called morning meeting. And in the morning meeting, they first tell the vision statement of Homeboy, that we exist to give formerly incarcerated and former gang members a chance to have a new life. That we believe their life has value. And then someone reads all of the activities that are happening that day, from tattoo removal to there's AA groups and Narcotics Anonymous and there's parenting groups. You should see these parenting groups. A resident from USC in the medical school comes over and they have these people sitting on the floor covered with tattoos. I was telling a group of leaders last night that one woman that I work with has tattoos under her eyes that say F you. Tattoo right there. Lots of anger. But they're sitting on the floor learning about the power of eye contact with their babies. They didn't know that. They didn't know how important that is. One of my Homeboy clients said, Laura, I just found out today that I'm supposed to talk to my baby. My baby doesn't know how to talk English. I didn't think she understood me. She had no idea that talking and engaging her baby was a part of how the baby was going to learn language. So in this morning meeting, after the whole, everything that's going to happen, all the exciting things that are happening, someone gives what they call thought for the day. And in this thought for the day, over and over and over again, because I've been there 3 years now, a very similar theme happens where someone will end up saying something like, I started caring about my life when I walked in these doors and somebody else cared about my life. And it was this simple act of someone showing up and showing care that began helping someone feel like maybe I could do more. And we celebrate at home. We celebrate when someone gets their GED. We celebrate when somebody gets off parole. We celebrate when somebody gets custody of their children back again. We celebrate when somebody graduates from Homeboy and gets a job with the city of LA, as a garbage truck driver or an electrician or installing solar panels. We create a community of kinship. That's what Father Greg Boyle talks about a lot. A community of tenderness. So one last thing I want to say before we stop is that another aspect of building a life of impact that I learned at Homeboy and I learned in my own life is that we have to be willing to acknowledge our suffering with one another. That's another very important part of presence. Very important part of having a true presence and not living in a false way with one another. We have to acknowledge and admit our suffering. And lots of people don't want to do that. One of the mottos in my home growing up was, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And later I learned that that was actually something that Thumper says in the movie Bambi. And I said to my parents, is that really where we wanted to draw our deep wisdom? From that Disney rabbit? But that was shit. If you don't have anything nice to say, I didn't know how to talk about my pain or my suffering. In the book Great Expectation, there's a beautiful image. Some of you, I'm sure, have read that for English, where Miss Havisham, who is jilted at the altar, insists on living the rest of her life in her wedding dress as it decays on her own body in a ruined mansion. And that's what she did with her pain. She could never move on. Some people deny it, like my family did. Other people wrap it around them like a blanket, and they don't ever want to move on. But I want to say to each one of you, you probably hear a lot that you are the steward of all the gifts and the opportunities and the privilege that you have. And that's true. But you are also a steward of your pain. You are to steward your pain well if you want to have a life of impact. Because if you don't do what Ms. Havisham did and wrap it around you like a blanket and not get over it, or what my family did, which was just deny it, and you actually let yourself talk about it with people, get help if you need it, process it, allow yourself to actually learn from it. It can be the birthplace of unbelievable impact. Think of how many amazing organizations started with pain. Greta Thunberg, when she was 8 years old and found out about climate change for the first time, she stopped speaking. She went into a deep depression. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, and that no one was doing anything. And that's when she began realizing she was going to not go to school from August until September, the end of September, when the Swedish Parliament was voting on something, and she sat every day by herself with a sign. That pain and that depression became the jet fuel for who she is today. I want to tell you one other story, and then I'm going to show you a brief 3 minutes of her TED Talk. I want to tell you another story of someone that did something amazing with her pain. And someone that's a little bit more like you and I than Greta Thunberg. And her name is Natalie Hampton. And when Natalie was in 7th grade, she went to a prestigious all-girls school, not Catalina. And she had 3 goals. She said when she went to school, she was hoping she would make a lot of friends, that she would like all her classes, even math, and that she wanted to graduate from there and go to a good college. But just a few weeks after school began, she realized that she didn't fit in. And over the course of those first few months, she became the victim of intense bullying. Cyberbullying, verbal bullying, and even physical bullying. She had some girls circle around her, push her to the ground. In this TED Talk, she talks about someone having their foot on her head while another girl took her laptop. She went home with scratches on her face and knots in her hair. And as her family first attempted to deal with this, they decided eventually that they were going to transfer her to a different school. It was too much of a toxic environment for her. And where we're going to pick up this video is when she starts to say what happened to her when she transferred to this new school. What I love about that is I can still kind of see her awkwardness, that there's something about her that's not polished, and I can see some of the pain still that is in her face and in her voice, but she didn't let that stop her from just being able to say something very simple as starting something with lunch. And where it went now, she actually won an Appy Award in 2017 for this. But I don't think that's what's important. What's most important, again, is the impact that it had on that one girl that got invited over there. So I want you, as we end now, I want you to realize that the power of your life, the capacity that you have to have a life with impact, has nothing to do with whether you get accepted to Stanford, Harvard, and Yale, and you get to pick between any of those, or if you don't go to college at all. It has nothing to do with the amount of money you're going to make, and nothing to do with whether you're famous or not. That a life of impact is going to be, who are the lives that you touch? What do people feel when they're with you? And what is it that you can do even starting today, as she said, to be more present in ways of kindness and compassion and tenderness? One of my favorite authors, Frederick Buechner, has a quote that I think about a lot. It just kind of marinates inside of me, and I want to end with this. Frederick Buechner says, "Here is your life. Terrible and beautiful things are going to happen to you. Don't be afraid." Thank you.